All right, we are at the top of the hour, so we will begin our presentation in just a moment. I see that many of you have joined the session, so we can go ahead and get started. So thank you, everyone, and welcome to this session, The Bridge to Understanding, Building Accessibility into Health Literate Materials. I am Kelly Ham, and I'd like to welcome you all. We're very happy to be presenting this session to the Health Literacy Conference today. So a little bit about me and my interest in this topic. I have very recently retired from UCLA and the NNLM Pacific Southwest region, which is the network of the National Library of Medicine. I have been a consumer health and community engagement librarian for many years, and well, since 2005. And in those years, I was able to provide health literacy training and information about accessing quality health information to members of the public, librarians in many different settings, community partners, and other organizations. So I have a lot of interest in health literacy and also in accessibility. About 8 years ago, the National Library of Medicine and other federal organizations started to pay much more attention to accessibility because of Section 508 of the ADA, or the Americans with Disability Act. And that legislation really paved the way for digital content and electronic content to be made digitally accessible to people and users with disabilities. So as a federally funded institution, NNLM was required to make all of their online content accessible to people with various types of disabilities. And that meant that we had to review all of the content we had online and either remediate the existing content, create new content that was accessible, or in some cases, we took down old content that would be too difficult to remediate. So some of you may be in similar situations and reviewing your website content or any kind of electronic content that needs to be made accessible. There is a direct tie-in with health literate materials, because as we're considering ways to make our information more usable and understandable by members of the public, it's so important to also make sure that it's accessible to all users, not just users that have good vision or good hearing. So this tie-in really was the catalyst, or the reason why I thought that this session might be useful to all of you. With that, my goal for today is really to introduce you to some basic concepts about digital accessibility, and to help you look at the content on your own websites and how you might be distributing information electronically, so that by the end of this session, you'll be able to understand more about digital accessibility issues and be able to describe those, to others in your institution. Also, you'll be able to identify common practices that create inaccessible content, kind of the best practices and the things that you shouldn't do in order to prevent those barriers. And then also you will be able to perform just simple techniques that can add accessibility to your content. So the reality is that there are many people out there with some sort of a disability. The National Center for Health Statistics conducts the National Health Interview Survey, and that looks at several domains of functionality, such as mobility, vision, hearing, other kinds of cognition issues, and communication. So just to give a bit of an idea what we're talking about, in 2018, 32 million, or nearly 13% of US adults reported living with a visual impairment of some sort. And 41 million, or 16.5% of users, reported trouble with hearing. So combined, that's about 30% of the US population that either have hearing or vision deficits or impairments. Add in additional disabilities, and we're all of a sudden looking at, you know, a major percentage of the population. So it becomes really important to think about how we're developing content to make sure that we're addressing the way that we create these resources so that they're accessible to the most number of people. And just as it isn't easy to assess an individual's health literacy ability by appearance alone, it's also very difficult to know just by looking whether a person has some sort of a disability that would prohibit or impair their ability to access digital content. So it's, you know, it's important to know that some of these hidden disabilities, such as ADHD or dyslexia or color blindness, might really impair somebody's ability to access the content. Another thing I'd like to mention is that as content creators, we tend to look at the material we're creating through our own lens, or through, you know, with our own eyes. And imagine that the web page that you're recommending, or the handout that you're sending to somebody by email, imagine that if on the other end, that person has a vision impairment and isn't able to actually see the document, then would they be able to use some sort of technology that would help them understand fully the same way that a person with sight would understand it, or the way that you think it would be understood? And then also, what about a video? Video is a great example. There are many health literate materials that are videos, and if a person wasn't able to hear, would there be captioning or some other sort of alternative to the soundtrack? So these are just a few examples, and without awareness of these issues, health educators, web designers, and other content creators could be inadvertently including elements in the content that would cause a barrier, or in some cases make something completely inaccessible to users. There are many kinds of assistive technologies for accessing digital content, and some of the examples, I'm guessing that many of you are familiar with screen readers. Screen readers and other tools that will take text and turn it into voice, or, you know, read aloud text. Screen readers are often used by people with vision impairments. They're used to read web pages and many other kinds of electronic content. So they're very important to create materials that can be utilized by screen readers. And another type of technology, you might be using it yourself. I have voice recognition software on my phone, and I often use it to dictate text messages. It's such a quick, easy way to get the content into those messaging systems. But it's very useful and essential, actually, for people who have trouble using a physical keyboard. So the voice recognition software has come a long way in recent years. It's really an essential tool. There are other kinds of assistive technologies, such as just simply enlarging text or displays for people with low vision, or for older eyes like mine. I appreciate having larger text now. And then audio descriptions of movies or other video. And I'm sure that you've seen closed captioning for video or for other kinds of video content on TV. Really the bottom line is that good design plus combined with these assistive technology really is the key for making your content accessible. So over the years, I've attended many, many trainings. I've read a lot. I've looked at standards and guidelines. I've read the text of the Section 508 law, and I've learned a lot about accessibility and proper design techniques. But I have to say that some of the most telling bits of information I've come across have been from users of assistive technologies. I've talked with people who are blind and access everything using screen readers such as JAWS or the NVDA screen reader, and their experiences really give an entirely different aspect or understanding of these issues. So based on everything that I've learned and those comments that and conversations that I've had with actual users of assistive technology, I've come up with what I consider to be the top 5 concepts that will help people when they're developing their content, and then techniques that go along with those top 5 concepts. There are many more, but these are the ones that I can tell you in a short amount of time that would actually give you some tools you can use right away. So today we're going to talk about creating structure in your documents and your slide presentations by using the tools that are available in those products. So we'll be looking at using the built-in layouts in PowerPoint, and we'll also talk about Google Slides a little bit towards the end. Also images. Images are so important in conveying information. So writing the descriptive text, if somebody couldn't see the image, how would you be able to describe it? Also, hyperlinks are a problem for many users. We'll show some examples how to work with hyperlinks. And then color is another important aspect. So using color effectively and correctly for meaning and also for color contrast. And then towards the end of the presentation, we'll talk about some of the do's and don'ts for creating good content and how to employ better practices. So today I'm going to be really focusing mostly on PowerPoint, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One, PowerPoint is very powerful and it has great accessibility tools built into it, and also a great accessibility checker. So the concepts that I show in PowerPoint can be applied to many other programs and products. So even though this is focusing on PowerPoint, you'll be able to take these same concepts and apply them with different products that you use. So to tell you a little bit about PowerPoint itself, it is such a powerful program. We've been using it for years and years. It has the ability to create these really wonderful, visually rich presentations with colorful templates. You can have great animations or transitions. But the other thing to know is that these slides really can be completely inaccessible to users with disabilities. So it's helpful to know what not to do with PowerPoint. I'd also like to, as we go through this, I'd like you to be thinking about your own workflow and see how you might be able to change your workflow so that you can, so that you are able to build in some of these new techniques as you go forward. It might take a little bit of work just to, change those habits, but I think it's really worth it in the long run. So when you're in PowerPoint, if you click on New Slide, you'll see something pop up that looks like the picture on the slide here. You have many built-in layouts, and these layouts are really the key to building the structure in your PowerPoint. And this structure is what's necessary for screen readers. So screen readers rely on the structure and the order that things are put into a document or a slide presentation to read it back correctly. And the screen reader is able to know if something is typed in the title field in a layout, the screen reader knows that that's a title and can announce that as a title to the user. It also will recognize any text or pictures, tables, graphs, other kinds of elements that you might put in your slides, as long as they're entered correctly in the proper structure. Now, these elements also can be resized. So if you're seeing this picture on the screen, let's look at the title and content box that's highlighted right now. That content box can be clicked on and then resized, moved around the screen so that you can make your slide attractive. Also, most of the templates don't come with a lot of these layouts, but it's possible to create custom layouts. So that's something we'll talk about a little bit later. But just know that layouts provide the necessary structure to work with assistive technology. Now, I mentioned that one of the mentions on the previous slide was that outline view is very important. So in PowerPoint, if you click on View and then go to Outline View as shown here on the slide, you'll see on the left-hand side, instead of little thumbnails of your slides, you'll see all of the text that shows up on your slide. Now, this is a key concept because any of the text that's on the slide should be showing in the outline view, but sometimes people will do things such as creating a text box on the slide, which is not using a layout, and then that text will not show up in the outline view. So if it shows in the outline view, the screen reader will be able to pick it up and read it. And we'll talk a little bit more about text boxes as we go forward, but just know that by looking at the outline view and making sure that what's there is also on your slide is an important accessibility check. I also had mentioned that in order to create the proper structure for screen readers, there are some techniques that you need to use to make that happen. So in copying and paste a picture as an example, you would want to, in that content box, click on the icon as picture, insert picture, and then actually pull the picture in from a file on your computer. The reason that you want to do this, there's a longer explanation, which I'll be talking about in a second webinar that we're doing later. We'll explain what the reasoning is and go into more detail. But just know for now that if you copy and paste images into your slides, it creates more work later, and it requires a manual check of every slide where there has been a picture that's been pasted into the slide. So this is the best practice. When you're creating your slides, when I do this, the technique that I use is that I create a folder for this particular project. And then as I'm going along, or if I have all my images that I want to use in advance, I just save my images in that folder. And then as I'm going through building my slides, I click on Insert Picture, I navigate to that folder, and then just pull the image in. And this, as you can see, this has text on the slide, and then there's a picture. And I've kind of created it so that the picture, fills the bottom of the screen. I resized that box so that it fits this, and then made the slide appear this way. So this is the best practice for using pictures with your slides. The second concept I'd like to talk about is describing your images. And we call it alt text. It stands for alternative text. Now, images are very important in creating your health literate materials. They help to tell your story, but it's important to think about if someone was not able to see your image, then how would you describe it so that they would be able to understand what that image means? And it could be just the literal description of the image. This might be a screenshot of a web page, but that doesn't really tell the meaning. So in this particular example, the alt text that would be described for this image would be, this was part of a training. And so it's really to show this particular website and where a resource was found on that website. So the alt text would be something like Disaster Information Management Research Center webpage with circle around Special Topics tab, pointing to Children and Disasters submenu. Now that's a long alt text, but it really would describe in detail what this particular image was about to someone who couldn't see with normal vision. Now, when you're writing alt text, there are quite a few things. I mean, there's really an art to it. You don't want too much, but don't want it to be so limited that it doesn't give the same understanding. So the way that you do that in PowerPoint, just quickly, you would right click on the image, you would choose size and position, and then alt text is one of your options. And so when you do that, you would click on the description field and type in your description there. You would explain the meaning. So if you had an image that was maybe an analogy to something else, or it was referring to a concept, you would want to describe what that concept is, not just the literal description. And also with alt text, the screen reader technology will be able to identify it as a photo or an image. So you wouldn't want to say, this is a photo of a boy in a doctor's office. This is a photo of the doctor's office. You would want to leave off the photo of or image of wording, because imagine from the user's point, if you were hearing that over and over and over again, it would be. So try to think of the ways that you would limit your repetition. If you have a logo that's on every page of your PowerPoint slide and it shows up as an actual image, then that's going to be flagged as an image. And technically, you would need to have a description in each one of those logos. So the best practice would be two ways to manage this. You logo the first time it appears, and then you to use a technique that would hide the image alt text going forward, and I'll tell you that in a second. The other thing that
Kelly,
you can do, yes.
Kelly, I apologize. Your internet connection is starting to get a little bit shaky and we're having some audio issues.
Okay, let me try turning off something here. Do you think it will help if I disable my audio?
You sound clear now. Try again, please.
Okay. Should I go back to the beginning of this slide?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And I'll let you know if anything else comes through shaky. Thank you.
Okay, great. And I did just, I'm actually going to turn off one other computer here that may be also accessing the internet. Apologies for that. So going back to the beginning of this slide, the art of writing alt text is really that you wouldn't want too much or too little as you're doing as you're writing the description. It's important to think about the user and the user's experience. You want to give the right amount of information that will explain the meaning. If it's just a picture of something that is literal, then you can describe that very briefly. But if there's additional meaning that goes along with the description, you would want to include that also. So in order to do that, you right click on the image and you choose size and position, and then the alt text field will pop up, and you would include all of that description in the description field. You would also want to limit repetition using words like photo of or image of, because the screen reader will tell the person that it is an image, so that would repeat and be kind of annoying. The other thing that you would want to do, if you have a logo on every screen, every slide in your presentation, you could describe the logo the first time it appears, and then the technique that you would use to ignore the subsequent logos that are the same is to enter the quotation symbol twice. So it's double quote, in the description field. And this causes the screen reader to skip over that as an image. And so that's a way that you can have the screen reader just ignore an image. This also works if you have decorative items, such as a border or a flourish or something that really doesn't add to the content. You can also enter those double quotes into the description field, and then it won't bother the user describing this is a border around the text. Another thing that you want to watch out for, the images sometimes in PowerPoint and other programs will have a description there already, and it will be the file name. So it might be some, when you take a picture with it will enter in some automated file name, and sometimes that shows up in the description. You definitely want to check every image's alt text and make sure that those are replaced with meaningful text. So before I go any further, I just want to make a comment about the question and answer pod. I'm hoping that any of you who do have questions as we go along can enter your questions in the Q&A, and we'll be looking at those towards the end of the presentation. I know that we're covering a lot of material, but I'll be able to really go into more detail and then maybe even share some of these techniques through the webinar at the end. So do put in your questions, and any that we don't get through by the end of the session, I'll be trying to answer and put in the discussion link on the IHA Health Literacy Conference website. Now moving on to the third concept I'd like to cover. This is pretty straightforward, but you've all seen hyperlinks that are really long, hard to type in, not very user-friendly. And YouTube is a good example. So the YouTube URL that you're seeing at the bottom, it's just unclear. And if, in this case, we have an image of the video and we have a YouTube link, so the user would know that it goes to YouTube, but they don't have any other information about it, like who produces this video or the title of it. So not very clear. But now in this example, same picture, the picture would have alt text that would describe what it is. And also the URL now tells that it comes from healthfinder.gov. It's a video, and the title of the video, which is Do You Suffer from WHIMS? And it makes it much more clear and understandable. But ironically, if you were to have this in a handout, like a printed handout that you were giving to somebody on paper, then this accessible hyperlink now is completely not unusable, or not have any meaning, because there's no way to know how to access it. So there may be times, so be thinking about this always. How are you going to use your content? If it's going to be posted online, you need to have a meaningful video, or a meaningful URL. And embedded within this that you see here is the actual hyperlink underneath, the actual URL that will take someone to the website. But if you're printing, then printing and posting the same content online, you may want to have both. You may want to have the meaningful part and also the actual URL so that somebody could type it in if they needed to. And that's where you could consider having a shortened URL if it was really difficult. I'd also like to talk about the next comment or concept, which is utilizing color in the way that's most user-friendly. So good contrast is really important. And you notice that black text on white background, or vice versa, white text on a black background, that's going to be your very best contrast. But if you have a light colored font on a light colored background, such as the gray or yellow font here, you can see how difficult it is to read. So you'll always want to be cognizant of the contrast and the colors that you're using, your backgrounds. Sometimes there will be a background that will have an image on it. So the image will go across the screen and there will be lights and darks. I know you've all seen this, where you'll have the text, and then where the background turns into a light background, then the text may fade out, or it may be really bright in one area and not in the other. So be aware of your backgrounds that you're using. especially for any kind of web content or anything that's going to be posted online. It's very important. And this website that I'm showing here, I just want to point out that WebAIM, it's an organization that's dedicated towards web accessibility. And the beauty of this website is that they have many tools, they have blog postings, a lot of resources that can help you get more familiar with some of these issues, and tools that you can actually use as you're creating your content. So this particular example is the contrast checker tool, and there are, it explains what the aim is, or the goal for your contrast ratio and how to achieve that. So, and they have little sliders that will help you see, okay, if you go to this side of the slider for the color, it is good contrast, and then as you go, lighter and lighter, it may be less contrast. So definitely check that out. I'll have links to this at the end of the presentation. Another problem with color is for people who have color blindness, there may be some problems with using color as a way to convey meaning. So this example, now this would be primarily in a printed form, but I see this sometimes on websites too, where red is used to indicate this is an important thing, or maybe it's a different color than the regular font. So here we have a form, and it just says required questions are marked in red. But for a person with color blindness, this may just all look the same. There is no other indication of which of these questions are marked in red. Occasionally you'll see something like this, and it'll say required questions are marked with an asterisk. And that's great, except that I recently learned that screen readers, there are some that can identify an asterisk, but some completely ignore those kinds of punctuation. So it wouldn't necessarily work for someone using a screen reader, because the asterisk would be invisible. So if you are using a document, if you need to have required fields, as in this example, you would want to use some sort of a form that can actually require the field. And if it's left blank, it would give a notification to the user that that field was missing. And the best advice I can give is to test it out with actual users to make sure that your forms are readable and usable by all users. Now, on this slide, the concept of breaking bad habits, I was thinking that it may be better to say learn best practices or learn better procedures, because they're not really bad habits. They're only the common practices that we tend to use every day that can cause barriers. So I think that the main takeaway is that there are certain practices that we might be doing on a regular basis, but it's better to be thinking about those and know what the barriers are that they can cause, and then try to incorporate better practices into our workflow. So I would say the most important practice that is so common is the use of text boxes on our slides. So PowerPoint makes it very easy to just draw a text box, insert text box, people draw them on the screen and then start typing in the text. But these are invisible to screen readers and they don't show up in the outline view. So it's very important to try to move away from the habit of creating text boxes and use the built-in content boxes instead. Now, you may remember when we were showing the slide layout options before, usually there are only 2 or 4 of those content boxes at the most in any given template. So if you are interested in having more text boxes, maybe you have a page with several pictures on it, and you also want to include labels for those pictures. it's possible to create a custom layout, and you can have as many of those content boxes as you like and still have it accessible. So the way you do that would be by going into the master slide and creating a custom layout. In the webinar that I'll be doing as a follow-on to this one, it's going to be scheduled about a month from now, and we'll be looking at creating those custom layouts as a way to really give you more power over your slides and still have them be accessible. So another common practice that creates a problem, we talked about this earlier, is the practice of copying and pasting images or other types of elements into your slides. So this adds, the way that this becomes a problem is that it puts the element outside the structured layout, and it generates a warning in the accessibility checker that requires you to go back and do a manual check of every slide that has that pasted image or element in the slide. So it's just better to not have that happen in the first place. You do an extra step at the beginning by saving your image in a file and then bringing it in through using the insert image button, and then that takes away this warning and this issue. Another thing that you should avoid doing is using animations that flash or flicker. People with epilepsy sometimes can have a seizure triggered by flashing or flickering imagery. So if you do have a need for something that has this kind of effect, then it's really important to do some background research and see what the guidelines are. There are guidelines for how fast an image can flicker and what is known to actually cause or trigger the seizures. So important just to be aware of. When you're checking for errors and issues, PowerPoint and Word both have very good accessibility checkers. They will find missing alternative text and also missing or duplicate titles. And just a word about why this is an error. Screen reader software has the ability to look at various elements within these documents or slide presentations. So imagine for a moment that you were a user who couldn't see the slides, but you wanted to get a quick overview of what was contained in that slide presentation. A great way to get an overview would be to just quickly read through all of the titles of the slides. So this slide presentation has nearly 30 slides. And if someone were just to look at the titles of each of the slides, they would have a pretty good idea what is covered in the presentation. So it's important for accessibility to have unique slide titles for each one of your slides and to make them meaningful. If you have maybe several slides on the same topic and you have a habit of having the same title for several slides in a row, it's more useful and actually a requirement to have a unique title for each one of your slides. So the accessibility checker will let you know if you're missing or if you have duplicate titles. It will also provide warnings and tips on how to correct some of the issues for unclear hyperlinks. And then the reading order, I haven't talked about this, but it relates back to the copying and pasting of images. When you copy and paste onto a slide, it will trigger the reading order warning, because when things are copied and pasted into a slide, it messes up the order. And so the screen reader may be reading back the elements in the wrong order. So it might read the picture description first, and then the title, and then whatever text is there. But you need to check and you need to make sure that the order is corrected before it can be truly accessible. And that's where the manual check comes in. So the manual check goes hand in hand with the accessibility checker tool. And in that, you need to review the outline view to make sure that everything that shows on the slide is also in the outline view, the proper reading order that I just mentioned, any color issues, the color contrast, all of these have to be looked at by someone creating the content, because the accessibility checkers aren't able to determine if the color contrast is right, as an example, or if you've included red font, to indicate a required field, as an example. And then you'll also need to manually check the alt text for every image. So hopefully that gives you kind of an idea on checking for the errors. So how do you do it? In PowerPoint and Word, you use the same technique. You go to File, and then you click on the button that says Check for Issues. That'll open up a drop-down menu, and you will click Check Accessibility. And that will check the entire document or slide presentation and then give you those errors and the warnings that you need to go through. Microsoft Word is not as complicated as PowerPoint. Structure also matters. Instead of having the structured layout, Word uses a different system, but it's basically the same. So if you have a title and you have headings in a document, you would use styles. You would apply styles to your different sections of text to indicate what it is. So you notice in this part that's circled in red, we have normal, which would be your regular paragraph text or just regular text. Then you have heading 1, heading 2, title, subtitle, and the styles can be customized as well. So this is how you would add structure to a Word document. Some people may use, they would highlight the title and increase the font, maybe make it bold and a different color, but a screen reader can't make sense of any of those formatting changes. So you would want to use the styles instead of formatting, your font. You also use the same techniques I described in PowerPoint for your images. You still need alt text, you still need meaningful hyperlinks. And then for really long documents, you would want to use the table of contents feature to automatically generate your table of contents. And this is another key point for accessibility. I'm sure you're wondering about PDF documents because we have so much content on our websites that are in PDF format. They can be created through Word, PowerPoint, InDesign, Adobe Acrobat, and then other content design programs such as Canva. PDF accessibility is very complicated. It's really beyond the scope of what we're talking about in this webinar. But I can give you a few tips. And one of the most important things is that if you create an accessible document in Word or PowerPoint, or slides in PowerPoint, you save that as a PDF. Most of those elements will carry over to the PDF, but you still need to do additional steps for full accessibility. So the best practice here is to create the accessible document or slide presentation first and then save it. Some PDFs, though, are images, image only. And an example of this would be so Canva, and I'm not picking on Canva. It's a great program. It's a very easy to use program for creating beautiful flyers and posters and other kinds of content, including presentations. The problem is that if you're going to be using a tool like Canva, when you save that, it saves it as an image PDF. So all of the text becomes an image, and then a screen reader can't access it. They just can tell that the document it actually appears blank to the screen reader. So in order to use Canva, I suggest that you would use this for your print handouts rather than using it for something that would be in an online environment, because it would be inaccessible without some additional work. Now with Google Docs and Slides, I just want to mention this briefly because Google Docs and Slides also have the accessibility features built in. They have, so for Google Slides, you have layouts, you have the ability to add alt text. In Google Docs, you have the header styles. It's very, very similar. So all of those concepts that we just talked about can also be applied to Google Documents and Slides. The reason many of you use it, and I'm the same way, it's very simple to use, great for collaborating with other colleagues. It's not quite as robust as either Word or PowerPoint, which may actually be a good thing for accessibility. Now, I do want to say that Google Slides has a really unique and powerful feature, such as the closed captioning tool that you see on the screen. This is such a phenomenal tool. It's Google has really kind of nailed the voice to text technology. And so if you're presenting using Chrome, you must be using Chrome. You need to have a plugged in headset or microphone like I'm using. You also need to use presenter mode to actually be presenting your slides. But when you do that, you can enable the caption tool. And if I were using it right now, you'd be seeing real-time captioning that would be doing, putting out the text of what I'm saying on the screen. So it's very powerful. And in the second webinar that we'll be doing in August, I'll be demonstrating this. So to wrap up the presentation, this slide deck was made using an accessible template from Microsoft. And I highly recommend checking these out. So there are many that are available for Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And the beauty of this particular one is that it's actually an accessibility guide. So they've created this template, but also it's a guide for how to create an accessible PowerPoint. And I think everyone will find that useful. If you're new to this and would like to try those out, then there are even samplers that have different kinds of clip art. They show how to create the alt text. It's really very cool. And the other major product companies such as Adobe and Google, you know, there are some additional helps with creating accessible content. So some of the resources are that I've found to be really helpful. I just included a few here because there are so many more. But the National Center on Disability and Access to Education has a number of cheat sheets that are useful for Word, PowerPoint, Adobe products, and also just some general information on accessibility. Adobe has done an excellent job for creating accessible PDFs, so I can recommend visiting that website. And also WebAIM. I mentioned that earlier as we were talking about the contrast checker, so the link is here. But also Microsoft Office, they have checklists that you can go through to make sure that your Office documents such as PowerPoint, Word, Excel meet accessibility guidelines. And then finally, the last link on this is the WAVE accessibility evaluation tool. And this is a tool where you can look at a website and determine what errors or problem elements are on a web page. You just go to this page, you copy in the URL, click it, and it will give you just a list of all of the errors and warnings on the page. Now, the follow-up webinar that I was mentioning is going to be held on August 18th, and I believe it will be at 9 a.m. This is just a bit of information about it. This page is not in the handout that's on the IHA website right now, the conference website, but I will put information about that there. And just watch your emails and watch the IHA website for additional information and how to access this follow-up webinar. So now I'm going to go to the question and answer pod, and I see that there are quite a few in there. So let's see what we have. If I'm not able to get to your question, because I know that we have about 11 minutes left, I'll answer as many as I have time for, and then any that I can't get to, I will do my best to answer on the Health Literacy Conference website. So a few that I'm looking at, we had a question about using, whether or not there were conversations about using an ASL interpreter during this session. And I apologize for that. We did not have that conversation, and it's something, it's an important question, and I thank you for asking it. It is something that I personally have not ever done. And so it would, but it is something that I'm interested in learning more about. So. Now, one of the questions was, when you save PowerPoint to a PDF and share that with viewers, does it retain the alt text? And the answer is, it should retain the alt text. That is something, though, that you would need to check again when you go into the PDF. There will be many elements that show up on the PDF as images, and but in doing the accessibility checker in Adobe, it will prompt you to add in any alt text that's missing. One question is there an online screen reader test to run PowerPoint through to see if it is working well? I'm not familiar with something that would be a simple test. There is a way that you can install the NVDA screen reader on your own computer. That is a freely available screen reader, but I have tried it myself, and I have to admit there's a bit of a learning curve with that. What I would suggest as an alternative would be, as you're looking at your PowerPoint, to check that the reading order is correct. You can tab through you just use your tab button and you tab through each of the elements to make sure that they're in the correct order. And you should be able to use technology on your PC, like a voiceover. But this would be something, I will follow up on this question and provide a better answer in the discussion area on the conference website. And another question about resources to use when creating alternatives to text. And I'm not quite sure what this question is referring to. The question reads, could you provide us with some resources to use when creating alternatives to text? And I'm not sure if you mean a video or something else. So I appreciate some clarification on that question. Reading through some of the other questions that have come in. One of the questions is, we use Microsoft Word for most of our materials and InDesign for more design materials and brochures. Are there any tips and tricks you have for working with these programs or for an online resource we can consult? And I will have additional resources that I can post in the discussion. Microsoft Word is fairly straightforward, much easier than PowerPoint. InDesign is a whole other, I don't want to say can of worms, because it's a great product and allows so much more power over your brochures and materials. One of the links that I included was on the Adobe website was for PDFs, but Adobe also has excellent materials for InDesign. And I do have some resources that I will put as links in that discussion. And I think that would be helpful to you. So a person asked for clarification on how to change the title in the hyperlinks, and I didn't actually show how to do this. If I have time before the end of the hour, I'll actually go in, but just to describe it without demonstrating it, when you're inserting your hyperlink, you highlight it, you right click it, and then that will bring up a dialog box where it will have a couple of different fields. And one of them is something like what text to show. And that's where you would type in the actual text that you want to show on the screen. And then the URL is the actual link, the HTTP colon, so that's where you would type in the URL. And if I have time, I'll show how to do that. It will also be available in the second webinar I do in August. A person asked, do you recommend the use of QR codes? And that's a great question. All of these are great questions. I don't know if recommend is the right word. What I would say is that if you believe your audience is the type of audience that would utilize QR codes, then by all means do. I don't think there's any harm in using a QR code, but now QR codes, for those of you who aren't aware of what we're talking about, a QR code is a type of an image that's generated that then can be used by a camera phone, or a phone camera to read that code. It's like a barcode, and it would actually then link to a website. So it's an easy way to use imagery as a mechanism to take you to a website. So it's not going to be as good if your users have a vision impairment. They may not be able to see where the QR code is. It is a convenient way, but it may also put up some barriers for people who don't know how to use QR codes. So it's really knowing your audience and knowing whether or not that's appropriate. I have not used them myself in an accessible presentation, so I don't know if they behave the same way as an image where you would also need to add alt text to it. But I believe you probably could add alt text to it. I'll have to check. Now, there are great checklists, some of the checklists on the WebAIM site and the other link that I provided, the cheat sheets, those would be good. And if I have others, I'll try to provide those to you in the discussion post. And someone asked, how does all this work for a Spanish language version of a website? Everything works exactly the same. The question is that if you're doing alt text, if it's a Spanish language version and your audience is Spanish speakers, your alt text should be in Spanish. Everything should just keep your user in mind. So it would work the same way, just that the language would be different. And suggestions relating to Word documents. We utilize Word documents for our family education, patient family education with our own logo and formatting. So with your logo, you would want to have an alt text description for that. And with the formatting, you would either create styles to fit your formatting. So if you have a particular font type, font color, and size for headings, then you would just create a style that would match the formatting. And will a screen reader capture changes in font like bold, underline, or italics? And the answer is no, it typically will not. So that's why you, if those features have meaning, you would want to apply the style for your headings or whatnot. And I think we are coming very close to the end of the hour. I'm sorry for all the questions I'm not able to answer. Here's one, do these techniques for alt text apply to other programs like Google Slides? And the answer is yes. Google Slides has the ability to add alt text. So I'm going to stop answering questions right now and get to the ones that I couldn't answer in the discussion section of the Health Literacy Conference website. I want to thank you all for coming. I'm just delighted that I had this chance to talk with you today. There's so much more to cover, and I hope you'll be able to attend that session on August 18th. My contact information is on the slide. If you're interested in knowing more, please reach out and I will get back to you. And I'd like to thank IHA for giving me this opportunity to bring this information to you. Thank you, everybody.